The wind howled as the rich man's carriage disappeared into the night, leaving his feverish son curled up against a tree. The boy's only companion? A wounded brown horse, watching him with sad, knowing eyes. Why would a father abandon his child? And what secret tied the horse to the boy's fate? The forest was silent, except for the boy's ragged breaths. His skin burned under the moonlight, his clothes damp with sweat. He didn't understand. His father had promised a hunting trip, but instead he'd been left behind with nothing but a blanket and a canteen of water. A twig snapped. The boy flinched, expecting wolves, but it was only a brown horse, its coat matted with dirt, one leg dragging slightly. The horse stared at him, nostrils flaring, as if recognizing something in his trembling form. The boy reached out weakly. "You're hurt too," he whispered. The horse stepped closer, its warmth the first comfort he'd felt in hours. The boy shivered as the cold night air bit through his thin clothes. His fever burned hotter, making his vision blur at the edges. The brown horse stood motionless for a moment, then suddenly nudged the canteen with its nose, tipping it toward the boy's limp hand. Water spilled over his fingers, an unexpected act of help from an animal that should have been afraid. The boy gulped the water down, his throat raw. As he wiped his mouth, he noticed something glinting under the horse's tangled mane, a broken leather strap, like it had torn free from something, or someone. The horse shifted, revealing deep scrapes along its side, too straight to be from thorns. They looked like rope burns. The boy's mind raced. Had this horse escaped from somewhere? He reached out again, this time touching the horse's neck. The animal didn't pull away. Instead, it lowered its head, pressing its forehead against the boy's chest, as if checking his heartbeat. A strange feeling passed between them, not just warmth, but something deeper, like the horse knew his fear. A distant sound made them both freeze. Hooves. Not wild deer, but the steady, heavy tread of a rider. The horse's ears flicked forward, its body tensing. The boy held his breath. Was his father coming back, or someone worse? The horse suddenly stepped in front of him, blocking him from view, its stance protective. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped just beyond the trees. A man's voice muttered curses, followed by the creak of saddle leather. "Should have tied it tighter," the voice growled. The boy's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was his father's stablemaster, a man with a reputation for cruelty. The horse's muscles coiled, ready to bolt, but it didn't leave the boy. Instead, it turned its head, locking eyes with him as if silently asking, "Trust me?" The boy gave the slightest nod. In one swift motion, the horse nudged him onto its back, then plunged into the underbrush, just as a torchlight cut through the trees. The stablemaster's shout echoed behind them, but the horse didn't slow. Branches whipped past as they crashed through the forest, the boy clinging to its mane. His fever made the world spin, but one thought cut through the haze. This horse didn't just find me. It was looking for me. The deeper they ran, the more the forest changed. Thinner trees, then open fields. The horse's gait was uneven, favoring its injured leg, but it didn't stop. Ahead, the outline of a crumbling stone wall appeared. A forgotten farm? The horse veered toward it, slowing as they reached an overgrown barn. Its doors hung crooked, but inside was dry hay and the faint smell of old smoke. The horse knelt carefully, letting the boy slide off before collapsing beside him, its sides heaving. In the dim moonlight, the boy saw something he hadn't before, a brand on the horse's shoulder, half hidden by dirt. A symbol, his family's crest. His breath caught. This wasn't just any horse. It was his horse. The one his father had sold off years ago after calling it useless. The one he'd wept over as a child. How had it found him? Why now? The horse nudged his pocket insistently. Confused, the boy reached in and pulled out the only thing he had, a silver button from his coat. The horse sniffed it, then exhaled sharply, like it had been waiting for proof. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats returned, closer this time. The stablemaster wasn't giving up. The horse's ears pinned back. It looked at the boy, then at a loose board in the barn wall. An escape. But the boy hesitated. If this horse had come back for him, there had to be a reason. And if his father's men were hunting them both, the truth was worse than he'd imagined. The boy's fingers trembled as they traced the familiar crest on the horse's shoulder, the same emblem that adorned the gates of his family estate. Memories flooded back. His 6th birthday, when this very horse had been his gift. A spirited young colt they'd named Ember, for the fiery glow of its coat in sunlight. His father had claimed Ember went to a good home after the boy took a bad fall, but the fresh rope burns told a different story. The horse's ribs showed through its dull coat. Its breathing labored from their desperate escape. Yet its eyes remained alert, watching the barn entrance as the stablemaster's curses grew louder outside. A sudden crash made them both jump. Someone was kicking at the rotten barn doors. Ember immediately positioned itself between the boy and the entrance, its ears flat against its skull. The boy noticed something strange. The horse kept glancing toward the back wall, where moonlight revealed strange markings carved into the wood. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols matching those in his family's secret ledger that his father always kept locked away. His breath came in short gasps as pieces started connecting. This wasn't just any abandoned farm. This was the old Miller place, the property his father had seized in a shady land deal years ago. The same property where 3 men had mysteriously disappeared. The barn doors shuddered under another blow as the boy scrambled to examine the markings more closely. His feverish fingers traced what looked like dates and initials. And then, his own name, written in a childish scrawl he recognized as his mother's handwriting. His mother, who had died suddenly when he was 4, who supposedly never visited this farm. A rusted nail protruded near the carving, holding a faded strip of fabric that matched the description of her favorite shawl. Ember nudged him urgently as wood splintered behind them, but the boy couldn't look away from his discovery. Why would his mother's things be here? What connected this place to his family's darkest secrets? Just as torchlight spilled through the cracking doors, Ember did something extraordinary. It reared up and slammed its hooves against a specific floorboard near the back wall. The wood gave way with a groan, revealing a hidden space beneath. The boy barely had time to register the bundle of old letters tied with blue ribbon, his mother's signature color, before Ember practically pushed him into the hole. As he tumbled into the darkness, the last thing he saw was the horse turning to face the intruders, its stance defiant. The stablemaster's shocked voice echoed, "You? But he ordered you destroyed years ago." Then came a sound the boy would never forget. Ember's enraged scream, not of fear, but of challenge, followed by crashing hooves and men shouting in panic. Alone in the musty underground space, the boy struck a match from his pocket. The flickering light revealed stacks of documents, land deeds, promissory notes, and most damningly, a marriage certificate showing his father had another wife before his mother. A wife who supposedly died in childbirth. But these papers suggested otherwise. His hands shook as he unfolded a brittle newspaper clipping. Local woman disappears with infant son after estate fire. The date was just months before his own birth. The match burned his fingers as the horrible truth dawned. His entire life was built on lies. Above him, the sounds of struggle continued. But now he understood why Ember had come back. This wasn't just about saving him today. The horse had returned to expose secrets buried for a generation. Dust rained down as something heavy collapsed upstairs. The boy barely had time to shove the most incriminating documents into his shirt before the floorboard was yanked away. But it wasn't the stablemaster's face that appeared. It was Ember's, bleeding from a gash on its forehead, but very much alive. The horse lowered its head urgently, and the boy didn't hesitate this time. As he clambered onto its back, he saw the devastation: 2 men unconscious near the doorway, a third slumped against a post. How had a single injured horse done this? Then he noticed the strange way Ember moved, not like a panicked animal, but with calculated precision, avoiding broken glass and debris with unnatural awareness. They burst into the night as shouts rose behind them. Ember didn't head for the forest this time, but toward the overgrown ruins of the farmhouse. The boy clung tight as they leaped over a collapsed wall, landing in what must have been the main hall. Moonlight streamed through the broken roof, illuminating a scene that froze his blood. A child's toy horse, carved from the same rare mahogany as the furniture in his father's study. The exact twin of the one he'd kept on his windowsill for years, believing it his mother's last gift. Ember stopped abruptly before a crumbling fireplace and pawed at the hearthstones until one shifted, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside lay a locket the boy recognized instantly. It matched the portrait of his mother in the family gallery. But when he pried it open, the face inside was a stranger's. A gunshot cracked through the night, splintering wood near their heads. Ember reacted instantly, shielding the boy with its body as more shots rang out. The stablemaster and his men had regrouped, and this time they weren't taking chances. The boy pressed his face into Ember's neck, smelling blood and sweat and something else, the faintest trace of his mother's perfume, the scent he thought he'd forgotten. It made no sense, but nothing did anymore. As bullets whizzed past, Ember made a sudden decision and bolted for the back of the house, where the ground sloped sharply down to a creek. The boy barely had time to grab the locket before they were airborne, leaping through what remained of a rear window. They hit the water hard, the icy shock driving the breath from the boy's lungs. Ember kept its head up, swimming strongly despite its injuries, as the current carried them away from the gunfire. The boy clung to its mane, the stolen documents a sodden weight in his shirt. The locket clenched tight in his fist. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, but his mind burned with questions. Who was the woman in the locket? Why had his father lied about Ember's fate? And most chilling of all, how had the horse known exactly where to find these secrets? As the creek rounded a bend, the boy spotted a shadowy figure waiting on the bank. A woman's silhouette holding a lantern. Ember changed course immediately, heading straight for her. The boy's heart pounded. After everything he'd just learned, he wasn't sure he wanted to know who she was. But Ember had brought him this far, and he had no choice but to trust where it led next. The freezing water swirled around them as Ember fought the current, muscles straining with each powerful stroke toward the shadowy figure on the bank. The boy's vision blurred from fever and exhaustion, but he could make out the woman's long gray cloak billowing in the wind, her posture rigid with tension as she watched their approach. As they neared the shore, the lantern light revealed weathered hands clutching a rifle, not pointed at them, but ready. Ember's hooves finally found purchase on the rocky bottom, and the woman waded in without hesitation, her strong grip pulling the boy from the horse's back with surprising gentleness. Up close, her face was a map of wrinkles and old scars, but her eyes, the exact same unusual shade of hazel as the boy's, burned with fierce recognition. "Took you long enough, Ember," she rasped, her voice rough from disuse. The horse nudged her shoulder urgently, and she nodded. "I know, child. I know. They're coming." She half-dragged the boy up the slippery bank as Ember scrambled after them, his labored breathing now wet and ragged. The woman didn't pause for explanations, shoving the boy toward a barely visible game trail. "Run to the oak with the lightning scar. Wait there." When he hesitated, she slapped Ember's rump hard. "Go with him!" The horse nipped at the boy's sleeve, pulling him forward into the underbrush, just as shouts erupted from downstream. The last thing the boy saw before the trees swallowed his view was the woman standing her ground at the water's edge, rifle raised with practiced ease, and the unmistakable family crest ring on her finger, twin to his father's signet. Ember pushed him relentlessly through the dense woods, the horse's breathing growing more strained with each step. The boy's own legs threatened to give out, but terror kept him moving. Who was that woman? How did she know Ember? And why did she wear his family's ring? The questions swirled in his pounding head until they burst into a small clearing dominated by a massive oak, its trunk split by an old lightning strike. Ember immediately began pawing at the exposed roots, uncovering a rusted metal box. The horse looked at the boy expectantly, its dark eyes reflecting the moonlight with an almost human intensity. Inside the box lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, containing 3 shocking items. A daguerreotype of a younger version of the woman by the creek, standing proudly beside Ember as a foal, a birth certificate for a male child listing his father's name. But the mother's name was the woman from the locket, and most disturbingly, a recent newspaper clipping about his own tragic disappearance, dated 2 days prior, claiming he'd been kidnapped by bandits. The boy's hands shook violently. None of this made sense. If these documents were real, then his father had planned this abandonment well in advance. And that woman by the creek, a gunshot echoed through the trees, much closer now. Ember's head snapped up, ears swiveling. The horse made a sound the boy had never heard from an animal before. A low, deliberate series of snorts and exhales that sounded eerily like communication. From the darkness came an answering whinny, then another. Hoofbeats approached from multiple directions, but these were different from the stablemaster's men. Lighter, quicker. 3 horses materialized from the forest, their coats varying shades of brown, all bearing the same distinctive brand as Ember. They moved with purpose, forming a protective circle around the boy and the wounded horse. Ember nudged the boy toward the largest of the newcomers, a muscular mare with intelligent eyes. When he resisted, the horse did something extraordinary. It reared up and brought its front hooves down hard on the metal box, crushing it flat, then used its teeth to grab the boy's wrist and press his palm against the brand on its shoulder. The mark burned against his skin, not with heat, but with some strange energy that made the hair on his arms stand up. The other horses reacted instantly, coming to attention like soldiers awaiting orders. Ember released him and nodded toward the waiting mare, its message clear. Go with them. Another gunshot, this time so close the boy felt the wind of the bullet. The strange mare knelt like a camel, allowing him to scramble onto her back just as armed men burst into the clearing. Ember charged them without hesitation, the other 2 horses flanking it in perfect formation. The boy's mare didn't wait to see the outcome, plunging into the woods at breakneck speed. Over his shoulder, he caught glimpses of the battle, Ember fighting not like an animal, but with calculated, almost military precision, dodging and striking with uncanny coordination with its companions. Then the trees obscured his view, and the mare carried him deeper into the night. After what felt like hours of relentless riding, they emerged onto a rocky overlook. Below stretched a hidden valley dotted with campfires, the shapes of tents and cabins barely visible in the moonlight. The mare whistled sharply, and answering calls came from below. As they picked their way down the steep trail, the boy noticed movement in the shadows. More horses, all bearing the same brand, all watching him with that same unsettling intelligence. His exhausted mind struggled to process it all. Who were these people? Why did they have an entire herd of horses linked to his family? And where was Ember now? The mare carried him straight to the largest cabin, where a familiar figure waited on the porch. The woman from the creek, now without her rifle, but with the same piercing gaze. Blood soaked her sleeve, but she stood tall as the mare stopped before her. "So you're the one they've been waiting for," she said, her voice softer now. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open, revealing an even greater shock, a frail, white-haired woman seated by the fire, her face a mirror image of the portrait in the locket. She looked at the boy with tears in her eyes and whispered a single word that shattered his world. "Brother." The ground seemed to tilt under the boy's feet. Brother? That would mean... His thoughts were cut short as shouts erupted at the edge of the camp. The woman on the porch spun toward the noise, her hand going to a knife at her belt. "They found us faster than expected." She gave the boy a grim smile. "Time to meet the rest of your family, boy. And learn what that horse of yours really is." Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. But these were different, heavier, more numerous. The boy's mare tensed beneath him, ears flattening. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just the stablemaster's men. And Ember was still out there somewhere, possibly hurt, possibly... The white-haired woman reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't fear the riders," she whispered. "Fear what follows them." As the first torches appeared at the valley's entrance, the boy finally understood this was no simple case of abandonment. He'd been thrust into the middle of something far older and darker than he could imagine. And Ember had been guiding him toward this moment all along. The camp erupted into organized chaos around him, armed men and women taking up defensive positions, while the branded horses formed up like a cavalry unit. The woman from the creek yanked him down from the mare and shoved him toward the cabin. "Stay with your sister," she ordered. "What comes next isn't for your eyes yet." But as the door began to close, he caught a glimpse of the advancing forces, and at their head, a familiar figure on a black stallion. His father. Only now, the man wore a uniform the boy had never seen before, emblazoned with symbols that matched the carvings in the old barn. And in his raised hand, glinting in the torchlight, was a whip woven with strands of silver. The same metal as the boy's button that Ember had recognized. The door slammed shut, but not before the boy heard the sound he'd been dreading. Ember's distinctive whinny from somewhere in the darkness beyond the camp. The horse was alive, and it was answering his father's challenge. The white-haired woman pulled him away from the window, her hands ice cold. "Don't watch," she pleaded. "The first time is always the worst." Outside, the night erupted with screams, some human, some not, and a sound like thunder, though the sky was clear. The boy realized with dawning horror that he might not have been rescued at all. He might have been delivered. And Ember had played its part perfectly. The cabin walls trembled as the battle outside reached a terrifying crescendo. The white-haired woman, his sister, pulled the boy deeper into the shadows, her skeletal fingers digging into his wrist. "They'll come for you first," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of medicinal herbs. "Because you're the only one who can wake the others." Before he could ask what she meant, the floorboards near the fireplace creaked ominously. A hidden trapdoor swung open, revealing a steep stone staircase descending into blackness. The sister thrust a rusted lantern into his hands. "Run to the lowest chamber. Find the stall with the silver hinges. Say your mother's name 3 times. Her milky eyes reflected distant torchlight as screams outside took on an unnatural echoing quality, as if both human and something else were crying out in unison. A thunderous impact shook the cabin, sending clay pots crashing from shelves. Ember's unmistakable scream cut through the chaos, not from outside, but somehow from beneath their feet. The boy staggered back as the sound seemed to rise up through the stones themselves. His sister's face twisted in anguish. "Too late," she breathed. The trapdoor flew open violently without anyone touching it. A gust of wind, smelling of wet earth and old blood, rushed up from below, extinguishing their lantern. In the sudden darkness, the boy felt something brush past his legs, something low to the ground that moved with purpose toward the door. His sister gasped. "The hounds are loose. They know you're here." Another crash. This time, the cabin door splintered inward. Moonlight revealed the woman from the creek, silhouetted in the doorway, her gray cloak now tattered and soaked with blood. She held a curved blade in one hand and a smoking pistol in the other. "Move!" she barked. The boy barely had time to register the 3 arrows protruding from her shoulder before she grabbed him and hurled him toward the trapdoor. He tumbled down the first few steps as the sounds of fighting erupted again behind him. Scrambling to his feet, he saw his sister still standing frozen by the fireplace, her hands raised in a warding gesture as shadows pooled unnaturally around her feet. The last thing he glimpsed before the trapdoor slammed shut above him was the woman from the creek turning to face something enormous emerging from the trees. Something that walked on 2 legs but moved with Ember's distinctive gait. The staircase seemed to descend forever, the rough stone walls pressing closer the deeper he went. The air grew thick with the scent of damp hay and something metallic, not blood, but like the smell of the blacksmith's forge when he worked with silver. Faint blue light began to glow from cracks in the walls, revealing strange symbols carved into every surface. The same markings he'd seen in the barn, but these pulsed faintly, as if alive. The boy's fever returned with a vengeance, making the symbols appear to squirm like worms beneath his skin. He pressed onward, driven by some primal instinct that warned stopping meant death. At the base of the stairs stretched a cavernous stable, unlike anything he'd ever seen. Dozens of stalls radiated outward in a semicircle, each barred with doors of different metals: iron, bronze, copper. But the center stall stood apart, its silver hinges gleaming even in the dim light. As he approached, the boy noticed 2 horrifying details. First, the stalls weren't empty. Shadowy figures stood motionless within, their shapes roughly equine but distorted. Too many legs in some, elongated necks in others. Second, the floor wasn't earth or stone, but a mosaic of thousands of interlocking horseshoes, all sized for different breeds, all slightly warm underfoot. A wet cough echoed from the silver-doored stall. The boy's breath caught. He knew that sound. "Ember," he whispered. No response came, except a weak shuffling. His fingers trembled as they brushed the cold metal. Remembering his sister's instruction, he choked out his mother's name 3 times. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, making the symbols on the walls flare brighter. With a hiss, like releasing steam, the silver door swung inward. The stall contained Ember, but not the Ember he knew. The brown horse stood on trembling legs, its coat now streaked with silver that pulsed like liquid metal under its skin. Its eyes glowed the same eerie blue as the wall symbols. Most shocking of all, a jagged wound on its chest revealed not flesh and bone, but swirling darkness shot through with pinpricks of light, like looking at a night sky through torn skin. The horse lifted its head weakly, and when it spoke, its voice was both familiar and impossibly ancient. "You shouldn't have come here, child of 2 bloods." Behind him, the trapdoor exploded inward. Heavy boots pounded down the stairs, too many to count. Ember's ears flattened. "The master comes," it whispered. Then, with effort that seemed to cost it greatly, the horse reared up and brought its glowing hooves down on a specific horseshoe in the floor. The entire chamber shuddered. One by one, the other stall doors began creaking open. The shadowy figures within stirred, lifting malformed heads. Ember's voice took on a terrible urgency. "Touch my brand again, now!" As the boy reached out, the first of his father's men burst into the chamber, their torches revealing uniforms adorned with the same twisted symbols from the barn. Their leader, not the stable master, but a hulking figure wearing a mask made from a horse's skull, raised a whip threaded with silver. "The pact is broken," he boomed. "The herd must answer." The boy's palm connected with Ember's brand just as the masked man's whip cracked through the air. Pain, unlike anything he'd ever known, erupted through his body, not just in his hand, but in his very bones, as if his skeleton were trying to reshape itself. The chamber dissolved into chaos as the stall creatures surged forward, their forms shifting and merging in the flickering light. Ember's voice cut through the madness now inside his mind. "Remember the locket. Remember your true mother's face. Hold it in your mind or we're all lost." Somehow, through the agony, the boy focused on the portrait in the locket, the kind-eyed woman who shared his features. As he did, the silver streaks on Ember's body flowed like mercury, spreading across the floor to connect with the emerging creatures. The masked man howled in rage, his whip coming down again, this time aimed straight for the boy's throat. Ember moved faster, interposing itself. The silver threads struck the horse's chest wound, and reality itself seemed to tear open. The boy felt himself falling not downward, but sideways into Ember's chest, into that star-filled darkness. The last thing he saw before the void took him was the stable chamber, folding in on itself like crumpled paper, the masked man's scream cutting off abruptly, then cold, then silence. Then, somewhere in the nothingness, the faint, familiar sound of hooves approaching. Not just one set, hundreds, and leading them a voice that might have been Ember's, but deeper, older. "The first seal is broken. Ride with us, child of the broken pact. Ride or die." The boy tried to scream, but had no mouth, tried to run, but had no legs. All he could do was listen as the hoofbeats grew louder, closer, and from somewhere in that endless dark, a new sound joined them. The unmistakable creak of a whip being drawn back, his father's voice dripping with poisoned honey. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you here, son?" The darkness convulsed. The boy felt himself being pulled in two directions at once, toward Ember's starry void and toward his father's waiting grasp. Then, piercing through the chaos like an arrow, came a sound that changed everything. A baby's cry, echoing from some unimaginable distance. Ember's presence in his mind went very still. "Oh," the horse whispered, with something like awe. "She lives!" And with those two words, the rules of the game changed forever. The baby's cry reverberated through the starry void like a shockwave, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the darkness. The boy felt Ember's presence surge with wild hope, an emotion so raw it burned through their mental connection. Suddenly, the horse wasn't just guiding him anymore. It was fighting, its will like steel against the forces trying to pull them apart. The silver threads in Ember's wound blazed brighter, forming a shimmering bridge across the abyss. "Step onto the light," Ember's voice commanded inside his skull. But before the boy could move, his father's laughter filled the void, thick with mockery. "You always were sentimental about that mare," the voice sneered. "But she's just a broken tool, boy. Let me show you what real power looks like." The darkness convulsed again, and suddenly the boy could see, not with eyes, but with some deeper sense that made the truth unbearable. His father stood at the center of a monstrous ritual circle, not wearing a mask, but transformed, his face elongated into something equine yet horribly wrong, his fingers fused into hoof-like claws. Around him knelt dozens of figures in tattered robes, their backs bearing the same brand as Ember, except theirs pulsed red as infected wounds. At his father's feet lay the woman from the locket, her body crisscrossed with silver scars, her chest barely rising, and cradled in his father's twisted arms, a squirming infant wrapped in a familiar blue shawl. The boy's non-existent heart stopped. The baby wasn't crying anymore, it was laughing, a gurgling, unnatural sound that made the void itself shudder. Ember's mental voice turned frantic. "Don't look at its eyes!" But the warning came too late. The baby turned its head, and where there should have been eyes were two swirling vortexes of the same starry darkness, that filled Ember's wound. The moment the boy's awareness touched them, knowledge flooded him, not in words, but in crushing images. He saw Ember not as a horse, but as something older, a guardian spirit bound into equine form by ancient magic. Saw his true mother, not the woman in the locket, but another fiercer face, leading an army of such creatures against his father's cult. Saw the night she died protecting him, her blood sealing Ember's spirit into a mortal horse's body with one purpose: to hide him until he came of age. Worst of all, he saw the terrible pact his father had made, not just to sacrifice his firstborn son, but to merge the baby's untouched soul with something that slithered between the stars. The vision shattered as Ember reared up in the void, its form expanding to eclipse the nightmare scene. "The bridge won't hold much longer," it gasped. "Take my mane." The boy reached out, and this time he had hands again, gripping silver-streaked hair as Ember surged forward. The baby's laughter turned to a shriek of rage as they crossed the glowing bridge. Behind them, his father's form twisted violently, the ritual circle flaring blood red. "You can't outrun blood, boy," he howled. "The mark is in your veins." The bridge collapsed just as they reached the other side. The boy and Ember tumbled onto cold stone back in the underground stable. But everything was different. The walls wept black fluid. The other stall creatures had fully transformed, no longer shadowy, but gleaming like living metal. Their eyes the same blue as Ember's. They stood in perfect formation, heads bowed toward a massive stone archway that hadn't been there before, its surface carved with running horses that seemed to move in the flickering light. Ember staggered to its feet, its wound now leaking strands of that starry darkness like blood. "The gate," it panted. "It's opening." As if summoned by its words, the archway's center shimmered, revealing a misty landscape beyond. Rolling hills under a purple sky, where more silver horses galloped in the distance. The largest creature, a stallion with horns like crescent moons, stopped and looked straight at the boy. Its voice shook the chamber. "The blood foal has been loosed upon the world. You must ride to war, or watch all burn." Before the boy could respond, a wet cough drew his attention to the chamber's corner. The woman from the creek lay propped against the wall, her gray cloak now black with blood. In her arms, she cradled a familiar object, the crushed remains of the metal box from the oak tree. "Took you long enough," she rasped. With shaking hands, she pried open the damaged lid, revealing a small silver horseshoe pendant. "Your mother's," she gasped. "Wear it and the herd will know you." A thunderous crash came from above, the sound of the entire cabin being torn apart. Dust rained down as the stone archway's glow intensified. Ember nudged the boy toward the woman. "There's more," it urged. "Hurry!" The woman pressed the pendant into his palm, just as the ground trembled violently. "The foal isn't your sibling," she choked out. "It's your replacement. Your father bred it from—" Her words dissolved into a wet cough. Ember finished for her, its voice grim. "From one of us." A stolen guardian spirit, twisted in that woman's womb. The boy's stomach turned as he understood. The baby was part horse, part whatever darkness his father worshipped. The archway's glow turned urgent, the horned stallion stamping impatiently. "Come!" it boomed. Ember lowered its head. "We must go now. The gate won't stay open much longer." But as the boy moved to mount, the woman grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Wait," she hissed. From her boot, she produced a small, curved blade, the same metal as the pendant. "Cut Ember's wound. Free what's left of the true guardian inside. It's the only way to stop." The ceiling exploded. Stone and wood rained down as his father descended through the rubble, no longer pretending at humanity, but fully transformed into a monstrous hybrid of man and stallion, his eyes burning with the same void as the baby's. In one clawed hand, he held the squirming bundle. In the other, a whip made of braided silver and human hair. The baby's head lolled to face the boy, its mouth stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. "Big brother," it cooed in a voice that was decades too old. Ember screamed a challenge, but the boy saw its legs trembling. The wound in its chest was spreading, the darkness leaking faster. The horned stallion at the archway bellowed, "Now, child of two bloods!" Hands shaking, the boy raised the tiny blade. Ember met his eyes and nodded. Behind them, his father laughed and raised the whip. The baby began to chant in a language that made the stones themselves bleed. And in that terrible moment, the boy made his choice. The boy's blade flashed as he plunged it into Ember's wound. Not to harm, but to free. The moment the silver touched the starry darkness, an explosion of light erupted, not from Ember, but from himself. His veins burned silver as the truth seared into his mind. He was never fully human. His mother had hidden her own spirit inside him at birth, the last act of a guardian sacrificing herself to protect the herd. Ember's body dissolved into swirling light, merging with the boy as his form shifted, his limbs elongating, his back arching, until he stood not as a boy, but as a creature of both worlds, a guardian reborn. His father's whip cracked toward him, but the boy reared up, his hooves striking the silver threads. The braided weapon shattered like glass, and with it the baby's monstrous form flickered, its borrowed power unraveling. The horned stallion thundered through the gate, his voice shaking the earth. "The pact is restored!" Behind him, the spectral herd surged forward, their hooves ringing like bells. The boy, now something more, turned to his father, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. "You tried to replace me with a monster, but you forgot. The strongest magic is love, not blood." With a final, desperate scream, his father lunged, but the herd closed ranks, their light consuming him and the twisted infant in a blaze of purifying silver. The last thing the boy saw before the gate sealed was his father's horrified realization. He had never been in control. The guardians had guided every step, waiting for the boy to choose his true nature. Moral lesson. The darkest chains are the ones we don't see: fear, lies, and the belief that we must be what others make us. True freedom comes when we embrace who we are, not who they tell us to be. The boy, now a guardian, galloped into the dawn, his herd beside him. Behind, the farm burned away like a bad dream. Ahead, the horizon stretched forever, wild, unknown, and finally his.